The POMZ-2, the Soviet stake mine, a simple yet deadly legacy, by a NATO weapons specialist. In the long history of warfare, few categories of weaponry have left such a persistent imprint on both military operations and civilian life as landmines. Among the arsenal of the Soviet Union, the POMZ-2 anti-personnel stake mine stands out as a symbol of brutal simplicity. Known in NATO reporting for its crude yet devastating efficiency, the POMZ-2 became one of the most widely used fragmentation mines of the 20th century. As a NATO weapons expert, I have examined this mine not only as a piece of ordnance, but also as a strategic instrument of Soviet doctrine. The POMZ-2, while technically primitive compared to modern mines, embodies the Soviet design philosophy of low-cost mass production, ease of deployment, and psychological impact on enemy infantry. For NATO forces operating during the Cold War and beyond, the POMZ-2 represented a persistent threat across multiple theaters, from the jungles of Vietnam to the deserts of Afghanistan and the fields of Eastern Europe. This essay provides a comprehensive analysis of the POMZ-2, drawing from technical data, operational reports, and humanitarian studies. It will explore its historical origins, tactical employment, operational use in conflicts, and the lasting consequences that continue to shape NATO countermine doctrines today. 1. Historical background of the POMZ family. The origins of the POMZ family trace back to the Second World War, when the Soviet Union sought effective yet cheap anti-personnel devices to delay and disrupt German infantry. The POMZ-1, a crude cylindrical fragmentation sleeve mounted on a wooden stake and fitted with a simple fuse, was introduced in 1940. It was modeled partially on the German S-mine concept, but simplified for mass production. By the late 1940s, the Soviet military recognized the shortcomings of the POMZ-1, particularly its unreliable fuse system and poor durability in harsh climates. Thus emerged the POMZ-2, an improved version featuring a cast iron fragmentation body, a more standardized stake mounting, and compatibility with the MUV series trip-wire pull fuses. The POMZ-2 entered mass production in the early 1950s and quickly proliferated not only within Soviet forces, but also among Warsaw Pact allies and client states across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Its simplicity made it one of the most widely exported mines in history. By the mid-Cold War, the POMZ-2 and its variant, the POMZ-2M, had become standard features of Soviet defensive minefields worldwide. 2. Technical characteristics. Design and construction. At its core, the POMZ-2 is a cast iron cylinder, 130 mm long and 55 mm in diameter, with preformed external grooves to aid fragmentation. The mine body is hollow, designed to accommodate approximately 75 grams of TNT. The top of the mine is threaded to accept an MUV pull fuse. The mine is mounted on a wooden or metal stake driven into the ground, usually at waist height, ensuring optimal fragmentation coverage when triggered. Fuse mechanism. The most common fuse used with the POMZ-2 is the MUV-2 pull fuse, activated by a trip wire. When the trip wire is disturbed, a small retaining pin is pulled, releasing the striker, which detonates a detonator cap that sets off the TNT charge. The fuse requires as little as 2 to 4 kilograms of force, making accidental activation highly likely. Lethal radius. Despite its small explosive charge, the fragmentation sleeve generates lethal shrapnel up to 25 meters from the detonation point, with dangerous fragments traveling even farther. NATO field tests estimate a casualty radius of 15 to 20 meters under combat conditions. Reliability and shortcomings. From a NATO technical perspective, the POMZ-2 has several limitations. It is vulnerable to environmental degradation, wooden stakes rot, and iron bodies corrode. The fuse is sensitive to accidental disturbance, making handling hazardous even for friendly forces. It lacks anti-handling features, making it easier to clear than more advanced Soviet mines. Nonetheless, its cheap cost and psychological effect outweighed these drawbacks for Soviet doctrine. 3. Tactical employment. Soviet doctrine envisioned the POMZ-2 as a component of layered minefields designed to delay, channelize, and inflict casualties on advancing infantry. Defensive usage. POMZ-2 mines were typically emplaced along perimeters, trails, and choke points. They were often integrated with anti-tank mines like the TM-46 to protect against mine clearance teams. In forested or jungled terrain, they were mounted on trees to increase fragmentation spread. Psychological impact. From NATO after-action reports, the presence of POMZ-2 mines significantly slowed troop movement. The tripwire system, often invisible under low light, induced a constant state of anxiety among infantry patrols. In practice, this mine was not only a physical barrier, but a psychological weapon. 4. Operational history. World War II legacy. Although the POMZ-2 itself was a post-war design, its predecessor, POMZ-1, saw extensive use against German forces. Lessons learned from these engagements shaped the refined POMZ-2. Cold War proliferation. The Soviet Union supplied the POMZ-2 in vast quantities to client states. It appeared in conflicts across Vietnam, used extensively by North Vietnamese forces to ambush U.S. patrols, Afghanistan, 1979 to 1989, deployed along Soviet defensive perimeters, causing NATO-supplied Mujahideen heavy casualties, Africa and Middle East, widely used in Angola, Mozambique, Egypt, and Syria. Post-Soviet conflicts. Even after the dissolution of the USSR, POMZ-2 mines remained stockpiled in enormous quantities. They re-emerged in Chechnya, 1990s. Russian forces and insurgents alike used them extensively. The Balkans, 1990s, found in Bosnia and Kosovo. Ukraine, 2014 onward. Reports confirm continued deployment of POMZ-2 and similar models. 5. NATO assessment of the threat. From NATO's perspective, the POMZ-2 represented a persistent and disproportionate threat. Despite its primitive nature, the mine inflicted casualties long after conflicts ended. Tactical concerns. Mines shaped battlefield maneuver by forcing NATO infantry to divert or slow advance. The ease of emplacing POMZ-2 mines in large numbers overwhelmed clearance capabilities. Strategic concerns. Mines served not only as tactical tools, but also as weapons of attrition against NATO-backed forces in proxy wars. 6. Humanitarian consequences. Perhaps the most damning legacy of the POMZ-2 is its impact on civilians. Unlike directional mines like the MON-50, the POMZ-2's random fragmentation pattern makes no distinction between combatants and non-combatants. Post-conflict surveys conducted in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Angola, and Cambodia revealed thousands of civilian casualties directly attributed to POMZ-2 mines. Children were particularly vulnerable due to their height relative to tripwires. For NATO humanitarian demining teams, the POMZ-2 remains a priority target during clearance operations. 7. Technological countermeasures. Detection. The iron body of the POMZ-2 makes it readily detectable using standard metal detectors, unlike later plastic mines. This provided NATO engineers with some advantage. Clearance. Manual clearance with probing and detonation, explosive line charges to clear suspected minefields. Modern approaches, drone-mounted sensors and ground-penetrating radar. Risks. The mine's sensitive fuse and unpredictable tripwire networks continue to pose risks even during professional clearance. 8. Comparative analysis. From a NATO analytical lens, the POMZ-2 can be compared to Western counterparts. German S-mine, also known as the Bouncing Betty, more lethal but more complex to produce. US M16 mine, similar bouncing effect, more sophisticated design. POMZ-2 advantage? Cheap, mass-producible, and effective enough. The Soviet philosophy was clear: quantity over sophistication. While NATO mines aimed for tactical efficiency, the POMZ-2 was designed to be produced by the millions and scattered across vast battlefields. 9. Conclusion. The POMZ-2 stake mine embodies the Soviet approach to warfare: simplicity, mass production, and psychological dominance. From NATO's perspective, this weapon has been a constant challenge on the battlefield, not because of advanced engineering, but because of its ubiquity and enduring lethality. Even decades after its introduction, the POMZ-2 continues to wound and kill in post-conflict regions long after political objectives have faded. For NATO, the mine represents not just a tactical hazard, but a stark reminder of the long-term humanitarian cost of indiscriminate weapons. In the end, the POMZ-2 proves that, in war, even the simplest devices can have the most enduring consequences.